So this week, the focus is really on energy levels as it relates to blood sugar. So when we think about blood sugar, we think about, insulin levels, we think about both what we're eating, but then also what our body does with our food once we eat it, and sort of how it processes those sugars, those fuels. And then really how much that impacts how we feel during the day. And that's everything from our mood to our energy level to our cognitive abilities to really our physical function, whether or not we can, feel like we have stamina in doing different types of exercise, or even in just sort of doing the activities of our daily life. So first, I like to start this off with definitions, just because then we can, we know the terms that are going to be thrown around a lot today. If anybody has any questions after I go through these, please, I'll kind of check in and see if we need to clarify anything. So blood sugar, what are we talking about? When I say blood sugar, what we really are talking about is the amount of sugar that's in your bloodstream at a given time. And blood sugar is highly variable. So if you take it, 30 minutes after you eat versus 2 hours after you eat, it's going to be significantly different. So we all do have quite a bit of variation there. That's normal to have a lot of variation in your blood sugar. We will talk a little bit about what happens when that variation sort of goes out of the range in either direction, either high blood sugar or low blood sugar, and sort of what that feels like, and then how we can prevent both of those things from happening. Hemoglobin A1C is something that a lot of people are very familiar with, having seen it on their labs. What hemoglobin A1C tells us is what your average blood sugar has been over the last 3 months. So what it's literally measuring is how many pieces of sugar are kind of basically stuck, or what percentage of the red blood cells has sugars sort of around it. And so that percentage gives us a good sense about, it correlates very strongly with how one's blood sugars have been over the last 3 months. And that's a very useful number, because the blood sugar itself, because it's so variable, if I were to test it, in the morning, I might say, oh dear, your blood sugar is high. And then by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I might be saying that your blood sugar is low. So really we have a strong need for this average blood sugar, which is the hemoglobin A1C. Very useful in medicine. We use it quite a lot. Insulin. So insulin, I like to think about it. If you picture a little eye, it's like a little bridge, right? So the bridge takes your sugar from inside your bloodstream and takes it and puts it into the cell. So if you have like the bloodstream and then your cell is here, the insulin makes a little bridge so that now the sugar can cross the bridge and go into the cell. It's the best way to think about it, because that's really its function, is to connect what's in the bloodstream to the cells. And it's a highly regulated system. The pancreas is what secretes the insulin, and it secretes insulin based on how much blood sugar is in the bloodstream at a given time. We're going to talk about some challenges that come up with insulin. How does insulin resistance develop? How does diabetes develop? All those things. But the most important thing to know is that that's the function of insulin, is to get that sugar into the cell. Glycemic index is something we're going to be talking about related to foods. So what glycemic index tells us is how quickly that food turns into sugar in our bloodstream. So when there's certain foods that we can, eat them and they're dissolving in our mouths and we're already absorbing the sugar. So those would be things like, candy, sugary foods, but even white bread and crackers, those really refined flours, we're actually already starting to absorb the blood sugars, or the sugars, right away when they as we're immediately digesting them. Foods that are where that happens a lot more slowly are things like whole grains or broccoli, and those, you can kind of picture how your body would have to work at them to get to the sugars that are inside. So they take a lot more digestion to get to the sugars, and because of that, then that sugar kind of comes into the bloodstream more slowly, because it sort of gets unpacked one little bit at a time, as opposed to something like bread that just sort of dissolves and is all being absorbed at the same time. So glycemic index is a number we used to use a lot, but there's been a big shift to using glycemic load, and both of these things are basically looking at the same thing, which is how quickly that sugar gets into your bloodstream. Glycemic load is a better number to use, partially because it gives a much more realistic way of comparing foods. So glycemic index is based on a quantity of sugars. So if you eat the 50 grams of sugar in that one quantity, or in that one food, then how quickly would it go into your bloodstream? Glycemic load looks at what's the normal portion of that food, how quickly does that go into your bloodstream as sugar. So the best example that people often talk about with that is watermelon, because if you were to eat 50 grams of sugar from watermelon, that would be you eating like almost like more than half of a watermelon in a sitting, in a very brief period of time, which does happen sometimes, like, but very often is not exactly what's happening. So really that kind of the realistic quantity that you're eating, and then how does that affect your blood sugar? Because we don't really want to say, if we look just based on glycemic index, you would say never eat watermelon, but actually, watermelon is far superior to eating a popsicle and it has kind of a similar place. It's a really good trade-off for something that would be more sugary, and actually contain more sugars. So that's what we're looking at with glycemic index versus glycemic load. Kind of moving forward, I will just talk about glycemic load, and we'll look at things from that perspective of comparing and being able to substitute certain foods. But just so you know, I wanted you to know those terms so that if you're looking up different things, that you'll be able to kind of know what they're talking about when they talk about glycemic index versus glycemic load. Any question about those definitions or those terms, or blood sugar, insulin, glycemic index, or glycemic load? All right, so we'll go ahead and move forward here. So how does blood sugar work in your system? So we have the bloodstream, right? And coming soon, there's going to be some graphics and some things that we'll be able to like add to our Zoom meetings so that I could actually make a graphic about this. We haven't done that yet, so I apologize. We're still working out a lot of things about the system, but I'm just going to sort of describe it. So you have a tube, right? If we picture it as a circular tube, where this is where all your blood is circulating through your body, right? And so here we're going to put your pancreas, right? And your pancreas is here, and it watches. So here you have you eat, and then it passes by your pancreas, and your pancreas says, oh, okay, there, I see that there are a certain amount, X number of sugars. Say it says 10 sugars, right? So it might make 6 insulins because it wants to leave some of those sugars in the bloodstream. So it makes 6 insulins. Those insulins make little bridges that make you be able to feed the cells. Those sugars move from the bloodstream to the cell, and then the cell is happy, it's fed, and then that sugar comes back around, and the pancreas says, oh, good, I have a good amount of blood sugar in the bloodstream. I don't need to change that at all. I don't need to make any more insulin, right? So that's if it's working really well, if that whole system is a go. There's a couple of different things that can happen that can make that whole system have trouble. So one of the big ones is if we eat something that has a lot of sugar, say like a sugary drink from a coffee shop, or something that's like a popsicle or candy or white bread or rice, so that all of a sudden we get this big dump of sugar at the same time. If you can picture, so that comes into this little tube, right, and it passes the pancreas there, and the pancreas sees that, and it's almost like too many sugars to count. So it kind of just like, it says like, I guess it must be about 100, right? And really it might be 70, but it's pretty hard to count when there's a huge number passing at the same time. Like if you were picturing that you were trying to count, something like a herd of something that was passing by you, it would be really hard to count them at the same time, versus if you just had like one animal passing at a time, So here, the big bolus, they call it a bolus of sugar because it's just sort of like a large quantity of sugar, passes by the pancreas. The pancreas sort of miscounts basically and starts throwing out a bunch of insulin. So now you have a little bit of extra insulin. And then because of that, you end up there's too many little bridges. So say, if normally it's supposed to be for every 10 sugars, this is not real numbers. I'm just sort of making it up for the ease of kind of math concepts. So if you usually have 10 sugars and you make 6 insulins, so you keep 4 in the bloodstream. Now if you suddenly have 100, and so you should be making 60 insulins, but you instead make 120. Now all of a sudden you've got too many insulins, so that too much of that sugar gets pulled out of the bloodstream into the cells. And so then that makes your blood sugar actually go low. So basically the pancreas overproducing this insulin because of this bolus of sugar makes you have actually get subtracted too many amounts of sugar from your bloodstream, and you end up with low blood sugar. Does that make sense? Or is anybody kind of lost on that? Oh, go ahead, Kathy. I think you might have to unmute yourself. Oops, we still can't hear you, actually. Not sure why, huh?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, that works.
That lovely voice. Okay, so the pancreas is sending out excess, right? And then it's circulating, but then it gets taken out of the blood so that you get low blood sugar. What takes it out of the blood? Did I miss that part?
Oh, right. It's the
How does it get sucked out of the blood?
Right. Good one. Yes, that's important. So it's the insulin. So the pancreas makes the insulin, and whenever insulin is made, it's the thing that bridges that sugar into the bloodstream. And so if you make too many bridges, because there's millions of thousands and thousands of cells. So if you make too much insulin, too much of that sugar will bridge out into the cells. Does that make sense? So the pancreas is the one
overproducing.
What's that?
Yeah, that makes too much.
Yeah, totally. Yep. So if we think about, this is probably the best way to think about it. For every insulin that the pancreas makes, you're going to subtract one blood sugar, because it's making a bridge to take out one blood sugar. So if you have
so with the bridges,
made 6 insulins, you would have 6 pieces of sugar. This is all like not actual numbers, but going out. So it's a subtraction. It's like it's a little bridge that makes it so that the sugar leaves.
Okay, so it's the bridges, the creation of the bridges is what sucks the sugars out and drops your blood sugar.
Yep.
Okay.
So and a big piece of that is that we want to give the pancreas the best ability to count how many sugars are coming in, and the best way we can do that is by eating foods that introduce that sugar very slowly, so that the pancreas can appropriately count. And so so really you can end up subtracting too much by this pancreas sort of estimating how many to subtract.
It's kind of like that Lucy episode with the candy factory, right?
Totally. That's right? Perfect.
That's a perfect analogy. Because,
oh man,
yes, because
I'm totally using that from here on out. That's so perfect.
Okay, speed it up. Okay.
Yep, all right. That's exactly what it's like. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So, absolutely. So one of the things is that once this happens a lot, so when that happens just every once in a while, so say there's a person who every once in a while likes to eat pancakes and syrup for breakfast, right? They will that day have like a very low blood sugar, because they're going to have that situation where their pancreas is going to overestimate and make their blood sugar drop too much. So that's the classic feeling really sleepy in the morning, and then crashing and feeling cranky and frustrated and anxious in the afternoon, which a lot of people get from eating, pastries or pancakes in the morning. So that's the person who does this every once in a while, right? If there's a person who, drinks 20 ounces of Mountain Dew a day, so they're constantly getting this kind of like big bolus of sugar, what ends up happening is that the cells kind of get wise to what's happening, and they're saying, hey, no, I'm not going to take that insulin up. So that insulin, so the pancreas makes the insulin, right? The little bridge that wants to take that blood sugar out. And then insulin goes to a cell, and the cell says, no way, I'm not taking that. I don't know. Like, I'm not taking up that insulin because I've seen too many of you insulins and I'm not taking it up, right? This is where you start to develop this type 2 diabetes, because now the cell isn't accepting the bridge. And here's the tough part, is then all of that sugar comes by the pancreas again, because now it's circulating all the way through. It comes by the pancreas again, and the pancreas counts it again. So now the pancreas is making extra insulin, right? So it just like creates this whole feedback loop where it just creates more and more insulin, because this, it's like if you were counting animals and their herd just kind of like went for a circle and then came back, and you were like, oh no, there's another 30 to count here, right? So every time it passes, it's making more and more insulin. And every time these cells get overwhelmed by the amount of insulin that's coming up to them, they get more resistant to that insulin. So then eventually, often in that scenario, at some point, those cells start taking up that insulin and the blood sugar gets too low. But this is how diabetes develops. So, and we're talking about type 2 diabetes. I should be very clear about that. So type 1 diabetes is an entirely different process that actually is totally separate from type 2 diabetes. Like they pretty much should not have the same name, but they just got the same name because they both result in high blood sugar, and specifically it's actually named for the excessive thirst that happens. Diabetes insipidus, so type 1 diabetes, we're going to just take that off the table. That's an autoimmune condition that actually has nothing to do with type 2 diabetes. But the predominant type of diabetes that we have in this country is type 2 diabetes, which is really develops from this cycle of excessive insulin production and then insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is the name for when the cells stop taking up the insulin. So, and really, anytime we basically eat too much sugar, we end up with the cells saying, no, I don't want to take that because it's kind of just too much. The whole system sort of like says no, but then we end up with a whole situation where the blood sugar just keeps getting higher and higher and higher. And that's where we end up with type 2 diabetes. So that's why a lot of the medications, the first line medications for type 2 diabetes are ones that help to make the cells take up the insulin better. So metformin is one of the predominant ones. And they just help the cells, be more likely to accept the insulin so that then that blood sugar can come down out of the bloodstream. One of the very tricky parts about all this is that the brain is the main organ that is not insulin dependent. So the brain, the sugars affect the brain in a way that's different from all the rest of the tissues because you don't need insulin to get sugar into the brain. And that's really a survival mechanism because we can't risk the brain not getting enough sugar. So what happens is your brain is extra affected by high blood sugar and then also by low blood sugar. And so that's why what you'll see when we get to talking about high blood sugar and low blood sugar, that most of the symptoms that we really notice are actual sort of mental emotional symptoms. And that's partially because of how the brain is affected by blood sugar in a way that isn't buffered by this whole insulin system. Any questions about all of that, about insulin or about sort of how that develops, or and it's more that section of this conversation is really just about if you kind of like are a person that likes to know the whole how it's working in your body. How does it work? If you're not interested in it, it's okay to just completely bypass that. You don't have to understand that in order to understand how to eat well for your blood sugar. But it is, I know for me, I like to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. So sometimes it's helpful to have that kind of like conceptual framework. But does anybody have any questions or sort of thoughts about that whole system? Or
maybe you could give an example of what happens on both extremes, what the symptoms are when you hear about someone passes out and all that.
Yeah, definitely. So that's actually a great segue. Thank you very much. I don't know if everybody has the little handout, but this is the symptoms part of this conversation. So when people have high blood sugar, so I'm going to talk about sort of like the more just sort of like normal functional type of symptoms, just because some of the more extreme symptoms that happen, for people who have diabetes, are things like passing out or going into a coma or, those kinds of things. For people who don't have diabetes, those are very unlikely to happen, but very frequently people will come in reporting these symptoms here. So the high blood sugar symptoms are going to be kind of like a mental fog. Sometimes people describe it as being like a fatigue, usually right after eating. Sometimes people actually feel kind of like a depressed feeling, sort of like a weepy or like a, I don't really like anybody or anything. Sometimes people get headaches, and the headache is usually a general headache. So it's a kind of like a full head headache. So not so much, I guess, though for some people it does trigger a migraine. So you could have a not full head headache. Also frequent urination. So very often people, one of the big first symptoms often of high blood sugar can be that they notice that they go from being able to go 2 hours without urinating to suddenly having to urinate every half an hour. There's lots of things that can cause that. So blood sugar is just one of them, but but that's something that for some people is basically your body's really good at getting rid of extra blood sugar. And what it does is it puts it into the urine to get to move it out. And it triggers a whole cascade of things that makes you urinate more often. And mood changes, really what I talked about in terms of like, those kind of depressive symptoms and thirst. So it's this kind of unquenchable thirst. And that's partly, again, your body being super brilliant. I mean, whenever we talk about these things, I'm always just like, your body's amazing. Like the fact that it can just sort of like flip a switch and say, hey, you drink more water because we need to dilute this, a little bit. We need to like get some, make this not so concentrated in terms of sugar, and we need to be able to get it out in the urine. Like that's so amazing. And then people just come in and they're like, I feel really thirsty, and that's their body doing its best at being able to regulate that blood sugar, to kind of get them to do what it needs them to do to regulate the blood sugar. So these are the kinds of symptoms. I mean, I think that when you want to think about your personal symptoms that you get with high blood sugar, the best test for this, or the best sort of like, oh, this is how I feel, is like picture the last time you ate pancakes for breakfast, and how you felt right afterwards. And that's probably what your particular symptoms are of high blood sugar, because for everybody it's a little bit different. And some people feel great after they eat pancakes, and usually those are people who have like a high muscle mass, because their muscles just soak up the sugar and they never really get a high blood sugar level afterwards. So yeah, you can think about like the little kids and the teenagers, teenage athletes especially, who can like totally eat pancakes for breakfast and feel great. Yeah, they can do that. We'll talk a little bit about that in terms of like how muscles affect this whole blood sugar system in the next section. But and then low blood sugar, a lot of times that will come on pretty quickly. People will feel kind of like shaky. Sometimes they suddenly feel like anxious, sweaty. So, sometimes people flush, or they feel like a heart racing feeling. Sometimes cognitively they just suddenly can't remember words, or they just notice that like they can be going along and it hits them, usually again, the big time that low blood sugar symptoms seem to be the worst is right in the afternoon. So that kind of like 2 to 5 time frame. And part of the reason for that is because the cortisol drops. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well in that next section, about how cortisol and blood sugar work together. But so really, and also very often that hangry, term that people use about when all of a sudden, and we all know somebody or are that person who, if we haven't eaten in 3 hours, we get kind of hangry, which means that like we get really frustrated or annoyed, or and for most people who tend towards that, everyone in their family knows to tell them to eat something, or that they're the person that brings snacks with them. Sometimes people feel nausea, and that's actually a really tricky one, because very often nausea makes people not want to eat, and they need to be able to eat to make their blood sugar go up. So that can be a really tricky one that can get in the way of people addressing the issue. And then the really rapid, with the low blood sugar, people have more of a rapid mood change. So they're feeling well, and then suddenly out of the blue, they feel anxious. And that's a little bit different. The high blood sugar doesn't tend to happen quite that rapidly, but sometimes it can. But that's kind of one of the distinguishing characteristics there. And usually the high blood sugar symptoms are something that we're seeing within that hour after eating. It's like when it's really coming on. Whereas the low blood sugar symptoms are often something we're seeing like 2 to 3 hours after someone eats. Not always true, but very often. So one of the exceptions to that rule is going to be when people eat artificial sweeteners. A lot of times they can get a low blood sugar symptom picture directly after eating, and we'll talk about why that is in a minute. So actually, you know what? No, I'm going to actually talk about that now, because I realized I actually included that above the symptoms of low blood sugar. So the reason that using artificial sweeteners can actually make you have low blood sugar is that the sweet of the sweetener can actually make your body produce the insulin. So there's part of when the insulin production is by actually seeing the blood sugar go by, but it's also the indication to your pancreas to kind of like turn on is the sweetness. So some people don't have this kind of insulin response, but a lot of people do. So there's been studies about diet sodas and even I actually know for myself, stevia does it to me, is that it'll actually make you make insulin. So then, but there's no sugar coming in. So now you have the subtraction happening, but no addition. So, you know, if your body was trying to maintain that 4 blood sugars, and then you add something with an artificial sweetener, it's not adding any blood sugars, but now you're making more insulin. So you're subtracting, you know, 2 or 3 of those blood sugars. And now you're going to be low on blood sugar. So, and that does often come on soon after eating the artificial sweeteners. And one way, some people will get the full symptom picture of low blood sugar with that, with eating, ingesting artificial sweeteners. And some people will just get a feeling of excessive hunger. So they like an insatiable hunger that they feel. And so often when people are trying things that are with stevia for the first time, I tell them to keep an eye out for that, because very often stevia can have that effect and create this sort of excessive hunger that can kind of backfire on the whole thing you're trying to do, which is to, watch what you're eating. So yeah, any questions about that? Like the symptoms of high and low blood sugar or how artificial sweeteners work? Mm-hmm.
Could I ask a question? For some reason, so I'm a person that tends to have low blood sugar, and I'll get all those symptoms you brought up. And I've noticed that if I have like a cup of coffee, and not with a bunch of sugar in it, just a regular cup of caffeinated coffee, that it can cause my blood sugar to drop really, really quickly. Yep. Is that just my head, or is that a thing?
That's totally a thing. So there's 2 ways that works. One is that I'm so glad you brought that up, because yeah, the coffee definitely does it for people. 2 ways that it works that way. One is that it increases your epinephrine and norepinephrine. So, and those symptoms of low blood sugar are actually what you're experiencing is because your body, epinephrine and norepinephrine are like adrenaline. So your body, when it is having low blood sugar, it will start to produce this adrenaline to kind of, which is all the things that make those symptoms happen, make you feel sweaty, make you feel fleshy, make you feel hangry. And it's because your body's saying like, alarm bells, this is not okay. I can't have low blood sugar, right? And so caffeine actually increases the levels of that adrenaline. So it'll amplify any symptoms of low blood sugar. At the same time, it does a whole other thing, which is that it actually, it stimulates digestion a little bit. So you get kind of like, more, sort of movement of the digestive enzymes and everything else. So you kind of like get all that going, but then it also makes you, it dulls your hunger cues. So it makes you more likely to delay eating until you have low blood sugar. So you don't get the first cue of, oh, I feel a little bit hungry. You get the like 3rd cue of like, oh, I'm really low blood sugar right now. We just bypassed my whole hunger process, which is why people who tend towards low blood sugar, one of the first things is never caffeine before food. So always caffeine with food, because that and also just kind of being really careful about eating before you hit those low blood sugar symptoms. Caffeine can be a doozy in all of those ways, for sure. Yeah. Anybody else questions about symptoms or artificial sweeteners or? All right. So now we're going to move into what you can do to really regulate your blood sugar. And I find that when people really work on the things to regulate their blood sugar, both through food as well as through the things we'll talk about here, it's the biggest game changer in terms of their energy, their sort of cognitive ability, their just general feeling about life. This is some of the biggest stuff here, and partly I think we can see how that's easy for that to be the case because of all these symptoms that we have from high and low blood sugar. So there's things on this that are kind of like the things on every list, right? Which is sleep and exercise and eating vegetables. So I always kind of like joke that like all of my talks like end in vegetables and exercise, and it's true, because those are really the things that we mostly need to focus on for health. But there's some nuances here and there, but really, if you hear nothing else from anything I ever say, vegetables and exercise is it. But sleep here. So sleep is really interesting when it comes to blood sugar, because a lot of people think about like the sleep is a time when you're not doing something, or when it's they don't think about sleeping more for weight loss. Like that kind of, for a lot of people, is sort of a cognitive dissonance kind of a moment there, because sleep seems like it's not doing anything for your metabolism, but it actually is doing a lot for your metabolism. So it does a couple different things. First, I'll talk about how we have studies that show that if you subject people to sleep deprivation, and we're not talking total sleep deprivation, we're talking about under 7 hours a night, even for a short period of time, you can watch their labs change to look like they're pre-diabetic pretty quickly. So they actually did a crossover study, which means that they have two groups of people, and then in the middle of the study they switched the groups. So they one group was subjected to sleep deprivation, and the other group is subjected to, it just gets to sleep normally. And then they watch their blood sugars during both of these times, and then have them eating similar foods and everything else. And for both groups, that when they were subjected to sleep deprivation, their blood sugars went up, their insulin resistance went up, so their insulin levels went up because they wasn't getting picked up by the cells. And these are healthy people with no history of any kind of prediabetes or blood sugar issues. So, and that's a short-term study. So when we think about people, how many people have many years of getting less than 6-7 hours of sleep a night, it's a major contributing factor. The other thing to kind of mention underneath the sleep headline is sleep apnea. So sleep apnea, especially in women, is underdiagnosed. It's, in women, it often doesn't present as the loud snoring that we think about with sleep apnea, or the large neck. It's often something that comes on, right after menopause. The symptoms I always look for are, waking with heart racing in the middle of the night, waking up feeling like you really haven't slept at all, waking up feeling like you got hit by a truck, or some people with sleep apnea, they actually sort of like, when they talk about sleep, they're like, it's like, it's so exhausting to sleep, is actually kind of, they say that in some form or another, like, oh, I kind of dread going to sleep because it's so hard. And it's like, oh, maybe we should check you for sleep apnea. So it's always something to be on the lookout for, and something I've seen that's been missed in people a lot. And that's, the other times we want to think about it, especially in women, is when there's unexplained hypertension or high blood pressure. So a person is like generally healthy and exercising, but their blood pressure is just creeping up. Sometimes that's a genetic factor, but sometimes that's sleep apnea as well. And then the other things we want to think about are, the quality of sleep. So, whether or not there's lights going on, or whether the sleep is interrupted, whether there's, a person is, working at night and having to sleep during the day. So if they get too much light exposure, the quality of their sleep can be affected. And also the other thing that's really important for sleep when we think about blood sugar is that sleep is really important for production of growth hormone, and growth hormone is really important for building muscle. So if people are, some of the bigger, like, weightlifters, they actually try to, some of them will sleep like 11, 12 hours a night just to try to optimize this growth hormone effect. And that's because, you really can't build muscle without getting enough of that rest or that sleep, really. So then that brings us to the next thing that's really, big on the list of how do we regulate blood sugar, is by building muscle. So what muscle does is it makes us less likely to develop insulin resistance, because muscle, of all the kinds of tissue, is the most metabolically active, meaning it's burning sugars all the time. So even when we're at rest, the muscle is there chugging away at those sugars. And so the muscle is more likely to accept that sugar because it's needing it more, right? So it's less likely to be like, no, please go away, and more likely to say, yes, please, come on in and give me that sugar, because it needs more of it. So the more muscle we have, the less likely we are to develop insulin resistance. So the less like we are to have that whole situation that I described, where that insulin kind of keeps on circulating and can't really function, because all that insulin has to do is get itself to a muscle cell, and the muscle is like yes, please, come on in. So that, anytime we also, when we do the physical exercise, that actually really helps to bring, to make the cells more likely to, all of the cells to pick up more of the insulin and use it. The other thing that I want to kind of filter into this whole conversation is the fact that when insulin is high, it's really hard to burn fat or to have exercise, translate into body composition changes. So when I say that, I mean kind of trading some fat mass for muscle mass. And that's partially because insulin is a hormone of storage. So what it's saying is, sugar, let's put you right here to save you for later, right? And that here is often fat cells, because fat cells are great storage. Like there are little storage containers, right? And they do it really well, and they've kept humans alive for many, many centuries of famine, like really effectively. But the problem is when you have that really great storage capability and you're in an environment where food is plentiful and exercise is hard, it's harder to come by. Our ancestors had a lot of exercise and food was not so plentiful. We have the complete opposite, is that, exercise is kind of, we have to work for it. We have to try to go, find it. And food is a little bit too easy in certain ways to get. I shouldn't say that, there's a lot of people who, have difficulty accessing food, and it certainly is very easy for us to find things that have a lot of calories that are around. So when we think about, changing body composition, like we, getting more muscle, because whenever, more muscle is, better for strength and stamina and musculoskeletal health and everything else. And fat ends up sometimes changing some hormonal levels. And it also, it can have some negative effects, especially when it's kind of around the viscera, the organs, and more of that abdominal kind of fat. So whenever we want to think about changing the body composition, if we already have high insulin going into a workout, we're going to have more trouble going into a fat burning mode. So say if you start the day and you eat something that is a high carbohydrate, you eat your bagel for breakfast, right? And then you want to work out, at 10 o'clock in the morning. If your insulin level is already high, especially if you have insulin resistance, you do all that workout and your body can't really go into a burning mode, because it's the signal that's out there is this insulin, which is a storage mode. And so you can basically, you don't get as much out of your workout if you already have high insulin level going into that workout. So that's always an important one when we're thinking about wanting to build muscle mass as well, and wanting to burn fat, is that we want to sort of set it up so that you don't have that high insulin level going into a workout. So a big one that we're going to talk about some more in terms of like the homework for the week is really looking at breakfast. So breakfast is kind of the setup, right? So there's kind of two different ways your day can go, right? If you eat a high glycemic breakfast, if we picture that this is a little graph here, right? And so here's the x-axis, here's this is the blood sugar that feels really good, is right in the middle here, right? So if you eat a high like your bagel, your pancakes, or your sugary coffee drink in the morning, right? That makes your blood sugar shoot up really high. Then your body makes a bunch of insulin to try to, probably excessive amounts of insulin, to try to like balance out this high blood sugar. Then your blood sugar drops really low because it's all this insulin got made. And then here you are in the afternoon feeling really tired, grouchy, and really hungry. So then often when people feel this low blood sugar feeling, what's the first thing they go for is something sugary, because their body's brilliant and knows how to solve the problem, but also because they feel like they need something fast, or else they're going to pass out or whatever, or not be able to function. So then they eat something else that's sugary, and they just do this all day long, this back and forth of that up and down. If a person starts the day with a low glycemic load food, so that might be that they have some chicken sausage for breakfast, or some sprouted grain bread with scrambled eggs, something that's a low glycemic. And actually, I want to make sure I make that point about sprouted green bread. What happens is then their blood sugar gets to come in really slowly, because remember, the body's having to work hard to get to those sugars. So it goes up really slowly, but they never have that overload of insulin. So they never drop too low. So over time, their body's just burning that sugar. And instead of going, tanking because you have the extra insulin, it just sort of like, it hovers right around this line, and then it just goes a little bit low. And then you have another meal, and as long as it's low glycemic, it just goes up really slowly. And this kind of like this more gentle curve throughout this whole situation, you feel a lot better the whole time. Versus, with the initial curve that I described, you're up here and you feel really tired and you have a headache, and then you're down here and you feel really angry and you feel shaky, and then you have a headache, and then and you just kind of feel bad the whole day, right? And I think we've all had days like each of those, but really the trick is that if you get your breakfast in a good place, you're not chasing your blood sugar all day. So whenever people come in and they say, I have a tendency towards low blood sugar, the first thing we do is look at their breakfast. And then we talk about that separation of coffee thing, but we also really always want to make sure that what they're eating for breakfast is a low glycemic load food. I included a link here on the bottom of this page too, that has a good list that I like to use for the low glycemic foods. It actually it'll list the glycemic load and the glycemic index, and it also has there's a meal planning kind of aspect to it as well. One of the things to kind of pull out of that when you look at those low glycemic foods, one thing to look at in terms of, I always want to think about trade ups, so what things can we trade that are similar but will do a lot better. One big trade up is actually sprouted green bread. So if you like to have a sandwich or a toast, best to use one slice instead of 2 slices of sprouted green bread. It's really significantly, so the difference between white bread and whole grain bread is in terms of glycemic index is actually less than you'd think it would be. So it's only, so if I think the white bread is in the 20s, and whole grain bread, so white bread is like 24 and the whole grain bread is 20. So it's only like a little bit different, but then sprouted green bread is like a 6 or a 7, so, and part of that is because when you're using sprouted grains, as the plant is sprouting, it's actually using the starch in the grain to make itself sprout, right? So it's eating up the starch for you and making it into it almost becomes more of a vegetable at that point, than a grain, because it's the sprout part that you're eating, not the grain itself, because the grain is like a seed, right? I mean, it is a seed, but it contains in it, the starch that the seed needs in order to start growing itself before it can reach the sun and use that to make energy. And so this starch is what makes us, actually makes it like a carbohydrate. It makes it a simple carbohydrate when we make it into flour. Oh, hello, welcome.
I thought my husband told me that the time you put in was at 6 o'clock, not 5:30.
Oh no! Oh, it's all good. Well, this is review for you anyway, so you can jump right in. Yep. You've done this class before, so this is
okay.
Good. So welcome.
Sorry.
Not at all. So the starch itself is what is eaten up by that as the grain is sprouting. That gets used up, and so there's less starch in that sprouted green bread. Some of my favorite sprouted grain breads, the one you can find pretty much at most grocery stores, is Ezekiel bread. There's also the Oat So Healthy at Aldi that actually is even better than Ezekiel. It's a good bread, but it's a sprouted grain bread. Of course, there's actually even better upgrades that you can do. So, there's the cauliflower egg wrap kind of things that make really good sandwich things that actually have no carbs at all. They're made from cauliflower and eggs. And they have the ones that I know about that are actually decent are from Aldi, that they're very thin and they're called crepini, and they make really great sort of sandwich substitutes for the days that you might want to pack a sandwich. So actually, any questions about that in terms of that list of kind of how to regulate your blood sugar, the sleep, physical activity, low glycemic foods and high protein breakfast. Any questions there?
Gwen, Dr. Rosenberg, what did you just say about the wrap?
Oh, crepini is the name of a wrap that you can get at Aldi that is made from cauliflower and eggs, and it tastes good, and it's a net zero carbs. That's actually kind of the beauty of keto being the latest fad diet, is that there's a lot of great low carb alternatives out there for, that are also really good for regulating blood sugar. I don't recommend all of the bacon and the saturated fats and the everything else, but I do recommend these certain things that come out of it, like this lovely cauliflower and egg recipe, or not recipe, but product that makes a good sandwich wrap.
Is it in the frozen? Is it frozen, or is it shelf stable temperature?
It's in the refrigerated section. Yeah.
Refrigerated. Okay.
You have to keep in the refrigerator.
Okay.
How did you spell it?
Crepini, crepini is what it's called.
Crepini. Yep. Thank you. I got to check that out.
It's like I guess it's kind of like a crepe.
Right. Yeah, maybe, because it's good for someone who has intolerance to grain.
Also that, yeah, it's totally gluten-free. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
And because I can't do oats or this, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep, totally. Because I know, in that sense, you'll see on the first thing of this, it's great to take your sandwich fixing and put them on a salad, but there are certain times it's really nice to be able to, if you're going for a hike with a friend and you just want to pack a lunch, it's really nice sometimes to just be able to make a food unit that doesn't require silverware, and
you don't have to warm them to get them pliable. You just
that's actually really nice about these, because there's so many of the grain-free, tortilla type things, so many of them are they crack, you fold them and they crack.
Right. That's right.
And that's always the hard part about anything gluten-free. So gluten is the thing that makes that kind of gluey quality that makes it be able to be pliable and stick together. And so, but this one, you don't have to do anything to it. You just get to use it and it stays together.
Well,
because it's almost like a eggy kind of a thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the in terms of trade-offs, this is a short list that specifically I borrowed from The Hormone Diet by Natasha Turner, which is actually a great book. It's got a lot of great information in it. But mostly just similarly to what I was saying about a lot of my talks, it kind of ends up with vegetables and exercise, really good for you. Which is all true. So some little things about how to make things a little bit lower glycemic, which basically means how do we slow that rate of the sugar coming into our bloodstream. Instead of making a sandwich, so you get the 2 full slices of bread, putting things on putting it on a salad, even making little wraps out of what you might make in the sandwich. Sometimes you can take even a piece of turkey and put some hummus in the middle and make that a little snack instead of putting it inside a sandwich or putting it and then the sprouted grain bread, if you're going to make a regular sandwich, or we talked about those crepini, but that trade-off to sprouted grain bread, if you really love having bread as in your life, sprouted grain bread is a whole step up. The other thing is actually eating something having lemon juice and water can actually lower the glycemic load, partially because that sour actually slows the introduction of the sugars into your bloodstream. So it stimulates, I'm actually forgetting the mechanism on that one, to tell you the truth. I was going to say it, but now I'm not 100% on it. But we can just kind of rest assured that the lemon juice lowers that glycemic load, not by a whole lot. But if you find yourself in a situation where somebody's making you a pasta dinner, if you want to just drink a little lemon juice, that can help a little bit sometimes. So whenever, and then another trade-off is whenever a soup calls for potatoes, white potatoes, adding beans instead, or using beans kind of in place of a lot of starches, because beans are better. They do have a lot of starch, but they also have a lot of fiber, so they're actually a lot lower glycemic index than any of our grains. But they can kind of feel like grains in a lot of recipes, feel like potatoes or grains. So they're an excellent substitute for for grains or potatoes. And then, so another big one, flavored yogurt is something to really watch out for. A lot of people kind of go for yogurt because it's like more protein, and it's like the healthy breakfast. But if you actually look at the sugar levels, they're quite high. I remember one time this was like 10 years ago. I was in the grocery store and I was feeling all righteous because I had gotten yogurt and my husband had gotten ice cream, and they were sitting on the belt next to each other, and I actually realized there was more grams of sugar in my yogurt than in his ice cream, and I was like, oh, forget me being all righteous about that, so really that really needing to go with the plain yogurt, and then if you want to add things like berries, or even like a little bit of like a little tiny, like a teaspoon of jam or something like that, you're going to be better off than the flavored yogurts that just contain so much sugar. And then you can kind of like really adjust the ratio there. Really there, eating whole fruits and vegetables instead of juices. So a lot of people like to get juices because they kind of give them like a lot of nutrients all at once, but then the trade-off is that you're not getting all the fibers that are in the vegetables, so the glycemic index goes up a lot. So fiber is something that really slows down the introduction of those sugars into your bloodstream. And anytime we take out the fiber, there's benefits. There's time and a place for juices. They are really great for getting some nutrients in, but very often it's even better to make a smoothie or to eat the full fruit or vegetable, because you get all the other benefits of the fibers and everything. And also even just getting used to having the fruits be the treat and the snack and the exciting dessert. Like get those raspberries, like even though they're ridiculously expensive, but because they're just a lovely treat, and there is something that's really important about sometimes having a treat, and they're so pretty and they're so delicious, and and really when you move yourself off of eating sweets, you realize how sweet fruit is. I don't know if you've ever, for each of us, if you've ever done that, complete sugar avoidance for a period of time, and then you bring fruit, you're like eating fruit, and it just tastes so incredibly sweet. And it's a really good example of how we actually, with sweet and with salt, you actually can really easily become accustomed to a certain level, and then anything, and it's pretty easy for that to ratchet up. So right around the holidays, for a lot of people, things don't taste as sweet because they're eating more sweets. And then, we do kind of like a sugar fast, and then they kind of reset that sweet flavor. And that's so that regular things taste sweet instead of, having things that are full of sugar. And then, and also too, for some people, thinking about like condiments is important. So, things like ketchup actually do have quite a bit of sugar in them, especially if you're using larger quantities. But things like mustard or salsa is a great condiment, because it gives you a lot more actual vegetable and less, and doesn't usually contain sugar. But step up from something like ketchup. So those are just a few little trade-offs, but pretty much anytime you can trade a grain for a vegetable, like eating cauliflower rice, or actually I didn't put these on this list, but the zucchini noodles or the cauliflower rice, any of those things that you can use that are kind of a starch alternative, really fantastic. Any questions about those, or any other tricks that people have found along the way that they want to share?
Gwen, question on the yogurt, is that full fat, whole fat, or?
Right, it depends on the person. So, and also depends on kind of what their goals are in terms of outcomes. So really kind of like the 2% is usually is a good baseline, right? So, but if someone is really sort of limited in what they can eat, and they're actually trying to get as much from that yogurt and be satiated for a long time, the higher fat is good for sort of maintaining fullness for longer. But also, I use it in a lot of people who, for whatever reason, are having trouble getting food in. If they're sort of going through an illness or anything like that, that whole fat yogurt is a great way to get a little bit of extra calories if you're trying to get more calories. the 2% is a nice kind of middle ground. And then the fat-free yogurt is also really good. It's when you have a little bit of fat, it actually does make it lower glycemic. So here's like another tricky little place, is that, so actually, for example, ice cream, so this is more of a kind of like direct ice cream that has a little bit more fat is actually lower glycemic index than frozen yogurt, which is lower fat. And there's two reasons for that. One is often and the same thing happens with yogurt too. When you're using a low fat yogurt, they tend to add more sugar to things to make it more palatable or more, more enticing. But the other reason is because the fat actually slows down that introduction of sugar into your bloodstream. So there's that 2% is a nice kind of like middle range, because you don't want to go, you don't want to be like, well, in that case, I'll eat all the fat all the time, and if the keto diet people are like, oh yes, definitely do that. But in terms of, those fats can also cause their own trouble. So we want to sort of like find that middle ground of having a little bit of fat there to kind of like keep it in terms of that more even keeled blood sugar, but at the same time, not overdoing it. And especially because dairy fats are saturated fats, and there are risks associated with saturated fats, specifically relating to heart disease. So 2% is a kind of a good place to be on that middle ground.
And what about, does it matter what kind of yogurt? There's so
in terms
many
of brand
out there. No, not the brand, but the type, oats. And there's, every time I go to the store, there's some sort of new brand there, or type.
Yeah. Right. So for folks who are dairy sensitive, there's more and more sort of, the non-dairy ones out there. I would say be very cautious about those, because some of them are just absolutely loaded with sugar. So the health benefit that you're getting from eating yogurt, the non-dairy yogurt, the Siggy's brand is very nutrient dense, and it's a good one. It is high in saturated fats though, so it's kind of something to eat in moderation. So you wouldn't want to, it's a good quality food, like it's real food, and it doesn't have too much sugar and all the things. And also it's pretty high in fats, and specifically plant-based, but saturated fats nonetheless. So that's kind of, if you want a plant-based yogurt, but eat half of it at a time, or that Siggy's is a great brand of that. In terms of the dairy-based yogurts, Stonyfield is an excellent brand. The strains that they use are really good. Siggy's is also another really good brand that I recommend. Those mostly I go for the ones you can find anywhere to recommend, just because there's a lot of great smaller brands, but then people end up chasing them around. But Siggy's and Stonyfield tend to be at most grocery stores, so that's why I picked those, because they have the good strains of probiotics too.
One other question, I'm sorry. Spaghetti squash, where does that go in?
That's great. Yeah,
It's
a huge step up from regular spaghetti. So that is a great, and it also is both in terms of glycemic load. It's a lower glycemic load than regular spaghetti, but it's also a lot more nutritious. So it's definitely a great substitute. The cauliflower rice is going to be a little bit better because it's even lower glycemic load. And then zucchini noodles kind of in the middle, but spaghetti squash is still excellent as a trade up for sure.
And is it considered a carb at that point?
It is, but it's okay. Yeah, it's a whole food carb, which is really different from a processed carbohydrate or a flour based food. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So now we have homework. So sorry if you didn't know, you don't have to do it. I'm not grading it. So you'll see on the bottom of your handout this little chart here. And it should take you only about 30 seconds to a minute to do per day. You write down what you had for breakfast, and then your energy level in the afternoon on a scale of 1 to 10. And then how many sugar cravings you had on a scale of 1 to 10, if that's a thing for you. For some people, it's just not a thing. So, and then just your physical symptoms, energy level, mood changes. So, and what I do encourage you to do is at some point in the next week while you're doing this experiment, to to have a breakfast that's more, more like higher glycemic, if you have one that you do every once in a while. And that could even be oatmeal, like some people feel amazing after eating oatmeal and other people feel pretty tired after eating oatmeal. So, but it also could be like if once a week you go out with your friend to have pancakes, try it out and really make sure to track on that day what happens after that as well. And it's kind of just a good, I always feel like with every sort of dietary change that you're making, it's worthwhile to ask, is it worth it? So for you particularly in your body, did it work? Did it make you feel better? And this is the kind of way to get that information. And you might come back next week and be like, hey, actually the day I ate pancakes, I felt like $1 million and I felt much better than when I had that, chicken sausage for breakfast. And then we can actually look at what that might mean for you, particularly as an individual. So, and that could give us some insight into things. So yeah, any kind of like closing questions or sort of overall questions that people have?
Well,
I have a question. Oh, go ahead. You go.
in the afternoon, the energy level, you want that 2 o'clock or after, because some of us do eat lunch,
Good.
that can mess with it.
Good call. Yes, definitely. We want it to be about 2 hours after lunch. So whatever that is for you. So generally kind of like that 2 to 5 o'clock range. Good, important question. Yeah. Go ahead, Kathy.
Question, like if you do like a high carb, like a pancake breakfast, would throwing in some protein help slow down that conversion of sugar? Does like if you
Add nuts.
it does?
Good one.
Add nuts.
Yep, it definitely does. So it doesn't make it perfect, but adding fat or protein are the two things, or fiber. So you could also, if you mixed into your pancake mix a little bit of fiber, you would slow it down that way too. Even if it's like straight up like psyllium husk, like a real fiber additive.
Mhm.
And then adding a little bit of fat or protein. So like, putting I don't know. Should I be advocating for putting butter on your pancakes?
I love butter.
Right, butter is good. Butter is really good, but and I don't know about making it as a general, like everybody should do that. But really though, yeah, if you say instead of having 3 pancakes by itself with maple syrup, if you have 1 pancake and eggs or chicken sausage or something like that, you're going to have a very different glycemic load of that meal because the protein and the fat, basically what they do is they slow down that digestion and that absorption of those sugars. Thank you for bringing that up because I actually meant to mention that in one of the parts and I did not do it, so I appreciate that. All right, anything else? Go ahead,
Can I
Lisa.
ask a question about water?
Yep.
So I've been trying to increase my water, and everybody's got their own way of doing things. And I'm sort of an all or nothing kind of gal, and that's just who I am. So I'm trying to drink a gallon of water a day. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about this having to do with blood sugar, having to do with overall health. Is that too much water? I don't know. What do you think?
It depends on your body size. And so, yeah, it might be a little bit much. So it depends. There's a couple of different factors we want to think about for that, is that it can depend on a person's, body size. It can depend on how much physical activity they're doing. So of course, if they're doing a lot of sweating, very, very often for like, athletes, a gallon of water is absolutely appropriate. There is such a thing as drinking too much water. You can actually have your sodium level go down because of drinking too much water. Especially the biggest thing is if you make a change too quickly. So if you go from drinking, like barely drinking enough water, like 30 ounces a day, to drinking a gallon, you can really throw off your kidneys. Like you want to build up to that. A good general sort of like, how do you figure out what's the right amount of water for you is take the number of the pounds of your body and then divide by 2, and that's how many ounces to shoot for a day. And that's a good goal. And then you add an extra 16 ounces for every half an hour of physical activity. Well, of moderate physical activity, and 32 for every half an hour of heavy physical activity. Yeah. So there's your little calculation there.
Did you say half an hour or hour?
also, except a lot of water intake can actually lower your blood sugar too, for some people, and it can try to change your hunger signals a little bit, which is helpful for some people in certain circumstances. Like if people are trying to lose weight, it's a helpful way to like keep those, have more of a satiety, which is like feeling full feeling versus hunger feeling. So it can actually decrease your, but for someone who tends toward low blood sugar, it could make you a little bit more prone to low blood sugar.
With the 16 ounces was for 30 minutes
Of like light to moderate exercise, and then
okay.
but go up to 32 if you're doing like like dripping sweat kind of exercise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Totally. Yeah.
Gwen, I have a question. It was a lady in the red room. I didn't hear her question. It was about if you have a sinking, what are you supposed to do if you sink in the afternoon?
Oh, in terms of doing the homework, it was when in the afternoon should you be looking at your energy level? And I said about 2 hours after you eat is what you want to kind of get that. So in that kind of 2 to 5 range. And probably even, I mean, actually another way to say it would be whether or not you like kind of at your lowest point, where was it? Is another way to kind of say that. Some people do have sort of like a biorhythm that includes an afternoon nap. So you could look at it as like, for an hour before your, before your nap. So like if you're used to taking a nap at 3 p.m., we don't really count, that can just be your own biorhythm, but, just sort of like relative to that, like how'd you feel right before your nap, an hour before your nap kind of thing. So that when people are kind of accustomed to naps, that can throw off that sort of looking at your afternoon energy level. But you can look at like the time before and after your nap and like how much did you feel like, going out and working in the yard versus sitting on the couch, like that kind of thing, before and after a nap. All righty. Well, it was great to see you all. And if anybody, later tonight thinks of a question they want to ask, or you can wait until next week to ask it, or you're welcome to email me and I'll cover the answers next week as well. So thank you all for coming. And I'm super excited that you're all joining in on this new adventure here. So thanks. And I'm very open to feedback. If anybody has feedback or helpful, sort of ideas for improvement as well.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Dr.
Great
Gwenn.
night, everybody.
Have a good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks a bunch.
Oh, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.